very expensive film, maybe 250 million, maybe more by the time we're done. Your chances of making 5 missions, surviving, were 0. And they went into a death spin, as it's called. They crashed and the plane exploded and they all died. Expected to die, expected to get hurt, expected to get wounded. Spielberg had company build 2 B-17s.
Donald Miller, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Andy. It's a pleasure.
Your book, Masters of the Air, I've read it twice now. Very comprehensive.
Did you buy it twice? That's a big thing.
I did, fortunately. I brought it on the audio book and then I brought the hard copy. And my fiance, Jackie, was like, "You're listening to this on the audio book. What the hell? Why do you need the hard copy?" And I was like, I just need the hard copy. You got to have the hard copy.
Well, I could hear the cash register ringing, you know.
It'll fund your trips over to the UK, so you can come over and help out. Well, they'll probably fund you. You'll probably be flying over business class anyway, because they're making it into the 3rd installment, really, of Band of Brothers, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Band of Brothers, 10 years apart. Band of Brothers is 2001. We're celebrating that anniversary in September at the World War II Museum in New Orleans. And then came the Pacific 10 years later, and we reaped quite a few Emmys at that. We had 14 nominations, I think 6 winners. And HBO, who we were doing it with at the time, said, let's do another one, you know? And so we did. And now we're in Abingdon, just outside of Oxford, filming. We got a couple episodes in the can already. Probably will wrap up around Thanksgiving.
Obviously, it's about the American bomber boys, specifically the United States 8th Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't Churchill essentially just give them credit for winning the war? How important?
Well, you know, I was searching around, Andy, for a title for the book, and Churchill, of course, was a big supporter of the air war, and you know, a huge advocate, you know, and petitioner to Roosevelt to get the United States involved earlier in the war. But there is a comment that I use at the beginning of the book that by the end of the war, that the Americans were, he used the term, masters in the air. And he doesn't quite say the Americans won the war. Churchill always believed that, like Eisenhower did, that, you know, it was like Neptune's trident. It was Marines and infantry, the ground guys, the Navy, and the Air Force, and it was a conjoined effort. And air did its part, and more than Churchill thought the public gave it credit for. Hanks and Spielberg are also going to produce a major documentary,
right,
that parallels the story, but expands it hugely to include the whole air war. So most of the stuff that you don't have in the film will be in the documentary, and we've already started work on the documentary.
When's that going to be out?
About the same time.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
amazing.
We did one of these and put it online for the Pacific, and it, you know, got a lot of hits. It was really well done, and we were making that as we were making the, in post-production, we were making the films. So you'll get a lot of that in the in the story. But I keep thinking, you know, for me, this, I should say nothing about the film, you know, we're talking about the film. The thing that struck me about working with Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg is their commitment to getting it right, their commitment to the history, their fidelity to the fact. And like Hanks told us at the first time we had a production meeting, when we were just crafting the design for the film, we created a thing called a Bible, which is the whole story. And it took a year to do that thing. Stanley Kubrick used to do that. Hanks liked that idea, because that way, if you go to filming the project like this, where you might have 3 directors, every director can read the Bible and know when they get a handoff, like one guy has 3 episodes and picks up, the other guy picks up the 4th. They've all read the Bible. They know where we're going with this thing. They know the arc of the story. That took a long while to do. And while we were doing that, preparing to do that, he said, look, there's going to be no, somebody said, how about composite characters? That, okay, this happened actually, but it didn't happen to this character. Okay. And so he becomes a composite character. Some of the things he does in the film actually happened, some did. Hank said, no way, no composite characters and no romanticization of this thing. He wanted grimness. He thought Band of Brothers might have been a little too romanticized. And he wanted a mood a lot like the German film Das Boot on the submarine warfare. He thought that was one of the best things ever done on warfare. Everybody just going about doing their job. And when you talk to the vets, that's what they said. We all just did our job. And there are no heroes in this thing. Heroes are all dead. But they made that emphatic that, look, this is a big, enormously complex war, and a lot happened. Why? And it was all dramatic. Why in the world would you fictionalize anything? Why would you have to use your brain to assemble the facts in a creative, exciting, explosively exciting film? And you don't have to make anything up. So every character in the film carries a name that is the name of the real person he's playing and does the thing that the real person he's playing did. So Robert Rosie Rosenthal, one of the emotional leaders of the 100th, and the guy I was perhaps most attracted to for a number of reasons. And that's who he is in the film. Gail Clevin, John Egan, those are the three major actors in this sort of thing, along with the guy named Crosby, who was a navigator. They carry the story. We had to have people who were prisoners of war because it's a big part of the story. A sizable part of the film deals not just with escape and evasion, but with life inside the Stalags. And that was our way of portraying the German mind and the German people, and as well as scenes of families under the bombs. So we get that, woven into the story as well. So great people to work with who have enthusiasm for the project, and fortunate for us, money. It's a very expensive film. Sizable budget, maybe 250 million, maybe more by the time we're done. I mean, they built a pretty big base out there in Abingdon, and it cost about £4 million. And Spielberg had a company build 2 B-17s, and they're real B-17s. I mean,
the real bombers.
Yeah,
Do they
Daily
fly,
Mail
or
been
they just
covering it very closely. You can tap on the internet and just go Masters of the Air, and you'll see all the pictures of the sets, and you see the B-17s there being hauled around the base.
Amazing. I want to talk about the bloody 100th, because that's like they're the main sort of characters, or the main thing that are in the book and going to be in the series. Why were they called the bloody 100th?
Well, they took a lot of casualties, but when you look at the record, in hindsight, they're not the heaviest hit of the American bomb groups, but they bombed in an undisciplined fashion early in the war. And when you do that, when you get out of formation, you're vulnerable to Luftwaffe attacks, from Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts. And they took their hits in short bursts and early in the war, and that's how they got that record. But later on, other groups surpassed them, if that's the word for it, in the horror of their casualties. But that's when they arrive in England, they're a loose group of guys. They hadn't been. There was almost no discipline in their training exercises. Their last training exercise, they were supposed to fly to a certain spot. They're training out in the Western Desert, Well, hardly anybody got to the spot. Some guys, most of the guys went home to see their girlfriends, took the plane home. One guy dropped a wrench out of the plane and almost killed somebody in Minneapolis. And they were going to disband the group. They were so crazy. The guys were so crazy, but they needed them. And so they sent them in and kept a pretty close eye on them. Yeah. But,
What were their casualties like? What were your chances like of getting through the war? Like how many sort of went up and came back? Like what sort of numbers?
well, yeah, you do that. They matched the general figures for the 8th Air Force. If you flew with the 8th Air Force, Harrison Salisbury kind of summed it up. He said you held a ticket to a funeral, your own. And 74% of the men who flew with the 8th were casualties. That doesn't mean killed, but casualties. And but early in the war, when we don't have fighter coverage for the planes, we're using British Spitfires, and they don't have a lot of range. They can't take you all the way to Hanover, Germany. They got to peel off just around there. So they can't take you deep into the Reich. During that period, and when we're kind of learning how to fly, learning how to fight, nobody had ever fought at that high, over 11,000 feet. And they're flying at 28 and 30,000 feet, let alone fought at that height, Like go to the top of Everest, and that's how high they were flying. They're flying 4 or 5 miles up. And so they took a lot of casualties there. There, statistically, your chances of making 5 missions, surviving, were 0.
Really?
Well, yeah, once you got to 5, the numbers said you have a 0 chance of surviving. And the Air Force published those figures. Guys got a hold of them, and they didn't publish them for public consumption, but officers at the base and intelligence had those figures, and they got around, and the guys kind of knew what to expect. In fact, they put up a sign. I think I have this in the book. They put up a poster. The Air Force did, for morale purposes, and they put it in all the Nissan huts and in the officers club, the enlisted men's club. And it said, it had a brave airman standing there. He looks like he's in a boxing stance. It looks like he's Gene Tunney or Jack Dempsey ready to punch somebody out. And it's an incoming Focke-Wulf, the best German fighter. And it said at the top in screaming headlines, "Who's afraid of the Focke-Wulf?" Well, 100 guys on base signed it and said, "I am." So it had its funny side. There was actually, and these guys try to create as much humor as they could to lighten things up. I tell the story in the book about a guy named Lovski. Now, Lou was one of the first guys I interviewed. At the time, he was in his late 80s, and I was interviewing him in a Norfolk, Virginia hotel. Had never met him. I went to a conference of 8th Air Force veterans and met some key veterans, and they got word around that I was interviewing, and he signed up. So he had been a navigator, little guy, but wiry, tough, and still, hard muscled. He came bounding in the room and he said, "Hey, I can do 100 push-ups." I said, "Oh, great." He said, he proceeds to drop to the floor and do 100 push-ups. So that's how he started the interview. But anyway, he tells me this story, which turned out to be absolutely true. He was on his first mission, flying over near Berlin, and they're hit by flak, and he bails out. Now, you had a choice when you bailed out if you were Jewish. You had a choice on all missions to put H for Hebrew on your dog tag or not. Okay. And he had the H on there. So I said, "Well, how'd that feel? You're in the parachute, you're heading down, and you're going to be captured, and you're a Jew." And he said, "That wasn't my principal concern." I said, "Well, what was?" He said, "Well, just before I headed out to Europe, back in the States, I went to a store and I bought over 100 condoms. And I said, 'You were that sexually active?' He said, 'No, I was a virgin, but I was really hopeful.'" So he stuffed these condoms in his dress uniforms for when he'd go to London. He hadn't gone to London yet. And it flew through his mind at that point when he's dropping over Berlin that, wait a minute, they're going to pack all my stuff up and send it home to my mother. She's going to open it up and reach into those pockets and find 100 condoms and wonder what kind of sex maniac she raised. Well, end of stories. Turns out he was in the camp. He got captured and he was sent to a stalag. And he kept waiting for guys for his group to get captured and come in and tell him what happened to his stuff. And they came in and said, rest assured, you know, as soon as we heard you were missing in action, we went to your locker, pulled out the condoms. We took them ourselves.
Good lads.
Your mother never knew.
The ball turret guys, someone not being able to get out.
There's some amazing stories, and what catches you when you write this book and what really keeps you going is these amazing stories that are unbelievable until these guys don't exaggerate in these things. I find out, you know, because you check it out and it's absolutely true. There's lots of witnesses to this. 4 gunners, for example. I told this story to a Benedictine monk, and I'd gone to a Benedictine college, and he said he spoke to the monastery, spoke to the monks, and used this story about human fellowship. And these 4 guys, gunners, sergeants, they all made a pact. They had formed a close friendship in training. That's where you form your friendships in training. And that if any one of them got in trouble, the other 3 guys would not abandon him. So one of the guys was a turret gunner, ball turret gunner, and the hydraulics went out in the plane, and most of the instruments went out, and they couldn't get him out. The plane was paralyzed; it was crippled. It had lost engine power. The engines were shot out. A number of the crew were dead, and the pilot hit the bailout bell, but they couldn't get their buddy out of the ball turret. So the last guy to leave the plane before the pilot jumped out saw these guys and said, let's go. And they said, you know, Frank's in the turret and we got a pact and we're going to hang with him. And that's the last anybody saw those guys. The pilot got out, that guy got out, and they went into a death spin, as it's called. They crashed and the plane exploded and they all died. You know, little guy, about 5'3", Hellraiser, Andy Rooney, I'll use Andy Rooney's language, said he was always in trouble. He was, you know, what all the guys call the fuck up, and he just couldn't help it. And he was always getting into trouble and getting into debates and arguments with people. Well, he was on his first mission, and they get close to the target and they get absolutely ripped by flak and fighters. And he's in the ball turret, and it's his first mission. He's not trained for the ball turret, but there's nobody. The guy was sick that day, so they put him in the ball turret. That happened a lot. And pilot says to one of the guys in the front of the plane, the engineer, there's a lot of noise and a lot of panic in the back of the plane. Go check it out. So the guy heads to the back of the plane and he opens this door that separates the front from the back of the plane. And there's a wall of fire there. And in the middle of the fire is Snuffy. He got out of the ball turret. And when he got out of the ball turret, he had fires. He's in the middle of the back of the plane. There's a fire coming out at him from the tail. And there's a fire coming at him from the front of the plane. So he's in a pincer situation with the fire. And then right in front of him is a guy who looks to be dead. Okay, he's out on the floor of the plane, badly damaged. So Smith gets fire extinguishers and tries to put the fire out, no avail. Then he says, I got to save this guy. In the middle of, right with all the flames, torquing up around him, he gets out what all airmen had, available to them. They had a vial of morphine and a needle, and they inject, because there's no medics in the sky. You can't scream medic or anything like that. These guys have to take care of themselves. So he gives him a shot of morphine to calm him down and hopes he's going to survive. And then he starts fighting the fire. And Meanwhile, the fire is, they have all these chests of ammunition back there, and the ammunition starts to go off. And when the pilot asked the guy he sent back what was happening back there, he said, all I saw was Snuffy with his parachute on, and on the carrier for the parachute, over his shoulders, there were shells bouncing off it, and it looked like his head was on fire. So he said, holy God. And they go back, and at that point, he's urinating on the fire in a panic to try to put this thing back, finds another fire extinguisher, uses that, then picks up these really heavy 120-pound boxes of ammo. Now he weighs 130, and he's throwing this ammo out of the side of the plane. Well, it's easy to do because there is no side of the plane. It's all been blown away or burned away. How do we know this? The guy who got beheaded, check, and missed that rendezvous with his reunion. This is before he was killed, obviously. He's in the next plane, and these planes were tip to tip, that close. And he sees inside the plane, because the whole plane's open to the air. He sees Snuffy in there pissing on the fire. And he goes, what is this guy doing? And throwing ammo boxes out of the plane. And then Smith said later, when they interviewed him, he knew that they lost their tail, wheel. So they're going to have a hell of a bounce when they hit the runway. They hit, and he thought the plane cracked in half, but it didn't. The guy lived. Stuffy got the Medal of Honor, and Secretary of War, we called it war then rather than defense. It's a better word for it. That's all we do is war. But okay. Usually you go back to the States to receive the Medal of Honor. You're a Medal of Honor recipient, and there's a big to-do about it. There aren't many of these guys, but Stimson happened to be in England. So he said, I'm going to pin this on him at the base. So he comes in with his entourage, 8 cars, and all that stuff. They can't find Snuffy. Well, Snuffy's in KP peeling potatoes because he'd done something ridiculous the night before in a pub. I don't know what the hell it was. And he's essentially, under arrest. So he's sitting there in a t-shirt. So they got him back, got him a shower, put a uniform on him. He raced out to the field, and Stimson pinned the Medal of Honor on it. First mission.
Oh, I hope they've got that story in the TV series. It's one of the greats.
Yeah, we do. We do.
Great. If a pilot got shot down over Europe, what were their chances like of escaping the?
Not great, but better and better as the war went on. For example, it depended on when you crashed. If you crashed when Hitler controls the whole continent, it's pretty tough. But if you crash, for example, after D-Day, when we start to push into France, there are places to escape to. But generally, early on in the air war, what you tried to do, you had an escape kit, this little kit that had a folding map in it and had tobacco in it and matches and a compass and things like that. That was of some help, and a little language guide, and which nobody paid any attention to because nobody thought they were going to. I talked to 100 guys about this. They said expected to die, expected to get hurt, expected to get wounded, but never thought about being a prisoner. Never thought about that. Never entered their minds. One guy said, if I'd have known, I'd prepared for it. And but if you were lucky, you got picked up by a sympathetic citizen, a family that would hide you in the proverbial haystack or in the back of the house, and got you eventually to a network of safe houses that were located all over Belgium, mostly in France, run by women. This one woman named DD ran a line called the Comet Line, which is one of the more effective ones until it was penetrated by the Germans and everybody was rounded up and sent to a concentration camp where all of them died, including DD. But when it was working effectively, you'd get DD and these women would escort these guys to Paris, which had good rail service all over. And you take a train down to the Spanish border, and then Basque guides were paid to carry you across the Pyrenees into so-called neutral Spain, which is controlled by Franco and the fascists, who are leaning toward the Germans anyway, but aren't formally aligned with them. And hopefully you could get to a British embassy there. And then the British could pick you up with a submarine or an airplane.
Donald Miller, thank you so much for coming on the show, and can't wait to see your book on the screen.
Yeah.
Masters of the Air, they calling it anything? Is it called anything different in the film?
No, we're gonna call it Masters.
Brilliant. Well, we're really looking forward to it, and thank you very much for listening. If you like this interview, we'd really appreciate it if you could leave us a review, and we'll be back again with another episode next week.